is Greg Drevenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. I'm recording this on September 20th, and we're in the final week of production for the November 2022 issue of Rider, which will be our first ever adventure-themed issue. The inspiration for this issue came from the guest on today's podcast, Dave Scott. Dave is an old friend of mine, and we used to ride together in the late 90s when I lived in Philadelphia and he lived in New York City. In the summer of 2020, during a record-breaking hurricane season that drenched the Southeast in rain, and while we were still in the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, Dave took a solo journey on the TransAmerica Trail, a mostly off-road route that extends from coast to coast. Dave wrote a story about his adventure, and it goes well with other features in the November issue about the Trans-Canada Adventure Trail, the Trans-Euro Trail, and the White Rim Trail in Canyonlands National Park. Dave has a way with words, which is why I wanted to interview him on the podcast as a companion to his story. With Dave nursing a cocktail on his back patio overlooking Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana, we had a freewheeling conversation via Zoom. Our interview got interrupted at one point when the afternoon sun overheated Dave's phone, but when things cooled down, we picked up where we left off. We talked for almost an hour, and we only made it as far as the Mississippi River on Dave's east to west journey. Enjoy this episode and stay tuned for a follow-up episode where we'll hear more about Dave's ride across America on a dirt bike. Hey, Dave, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I was just reflecting that the last time I saw you was just shy of a year ago now, and I had just finished the TED. It was a whole year ago now.
Yeah.
And I was on my way home, and I passed by with the bike in the trailer.
Yeah, you and I sat around the back patio and had some beers, and you told me about your experience on the TransAmerica Trail, and I was like, hey, man, you got to write a story for the magazine.
Yeah, a whole beard has been grown since then by both of us.
Exactly. So, for the benefit of people who are listening, because this is only an audio podcast, but we do this via Zoom call, and I'm looking at you as you're sitting on your patio. Over your shoulder is Lake Pontchartrain. So you're in Louisiana, just north of New Orleans, and it looks like a nice, beautiful sunny day. You've got a glass iced tea. I guess that's iced tea.
That's a whiskey cider sour.
Even better.
I'm a couple of hours ahead of you, baby.
So the reason I want to talk to you is like you've got this feature story. So the November issue of Rider, November 2022 issue of Rider has this adventure theme. And really it started when you said that you would write a story about the TransAmerica Trail, because once I was arm twisting you to kind of write the story and send me some photos, I had a guy from Wales send me a story with some really cool photos. He did part of the Trans-Euro Trail. And so he did the portion in Albania, but there's like 32,000 miles of off-road trails that are all over Europe. I didn't even realize that existed. And then another guy sent me a story about riding part of the Trans-Canada Adventure Trail. And so that's a 9,000 mile trail that goes from Newfoundland to British Columbia across Canada. And they rode about 1,000 miles in Ontario. But you took on, kind of the granddaddy, the TransAmerica Trail. What inspired you to do it?
Well, in terms of specifically writing the article, I remember you telling me this, and you shamed me into that. All the United Colors of Benetton are already writing about it, and we don't even have one yet of the U.S. But in terms of the actual trail, I've had dirt bikes my whole life. I've been my first ever motorcycle. I was 8 years old, and it came from K&N Motorcycles, run by Malcolm Smith, who was a friend of my dad's through their respective wives about horses or something. And so I've had motorcycles since I was 8 years old, and I'm 58 now. It's for 50 years. Wow. So, and every time you ride, it's always time to come back. When you're riding in the dirt, especially, you got a littler tank and the trail ends and out and back, and you go back to the campground or go back to the road or whatever. But every single time, always, that moment, and you're like, what if I don't go back? Sometimes the trail is just a loop or it ends at a canyon, but most of the time there's still more trails out there, and that's always been there with me. And then when I heard about the TransAmerica Trail, I don't know where I stumbled upon it, somewhere internet surfing or on AdWriter or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, there it is. You start at the ocean to your back and you run until you get wet. That's the end of the road through the whole continent on a dirt bike. And so, once I heard about it, I would been in a perpetual state of planning. In the beginning, it was almost half fantasy, but by golly, when I retired from the State Department, I was like, the little so-called bucket list or something. And I figured, well, of all the things I'd like to do in this world, this one probably takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Probably up front first. And so I might as well do that before I'm pulling around the oxygen trailer, And actually, one of them was to climb all the high points. I got about, I don't know, almost 40 of them. But I don't know if I'm ever going to climb Denali, especially now that I've broken my leg so damn many times.
So you mean that to hike all the high points in the United States?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got I got 39 of them. And actually, I was going to do it internationally. And I did Kilimanjaro, and I thought, well, I can do once I do but again, the whole mountain climbing thing's probably not going to happen. Yeah. So then what's next on the list? Well, there's the TransAmerica Trail. And then I was my last overseas assignment was in Khartoum, Sudan. And so since at that time we had more sanctions on Sudan than did North Korea, and we bombed them once upon a time, but we still maintained a embassy presence, and they were on the listed of sponsors of terrorism list. And so therefore you couldn't go out very often because if your first responders and law enforcement are actually terrorists, it makes it hard to really interact with the community directly. So therefore, I had some people play fantasy football or whatever, but I had the entire TAT in all of America and the various trails that connect them through the internet at my disposal. And I went down the rabbit hole and planned the amazing trip of the gods.
So give us a little bit of a backstory, because I know I don't think I knew it until I read your story. But so the original guy who mapped and scouted the original
Sam Carrero.
They should
be building statues of him in the middle of roundabouts, and you don't have to worry about Confederate stuff or this and that. Is Sam Carrero. He lives currently in Counce, Tennessee. Is an amazing American hero that should be on a postage stamp. Is that way back in the 80s, and he was, I guess, a salesman. He lived in northern Mississippi, as far as I understand. And he was a dirt bike guy, and he was a every weekend dirt bike guy. And I guess, beautiful man, I don't want to impinge on anything, but a little bit of ADD and a lot of temerity and a large degree of focus is that he sat there, and this is in the pre-internet days. I mean, before Al Gore invented it, and we all have it. I guess it was out there for a couple of eggheads, but for regular people, he literally got Forest Service maps, and he sat there and stitched together a trail with that same idea. Where does this go? And then where does this go? And I wonder if this can go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And so the original TAT actually didn't start in the Atlantic. It started right at the border of eastern Tennessee, right outside the Smoky Mountains and Tellico Plains, I think it is. And then and it went all the way to Port Orford, Oregon. And this is what makes him an amazingly huge, large phallus, balls the size of cassava melons, American hero that deserves on a postage stamp and a statue, is that he put it on the internet. And once it went on the internet, it became everybody's trail. It wasn't just Sam's, it was everybody's. And then from there, little individual trail people decided to adopt pieces of it. Local motorcycle clubs decided to, keep pieces of it. There would be some kind of cataclysm, flood, or shoot. I mean, a lot of rural areas, I don't begrudge people paving their roads to get to their ranch. I mean, there's a lot of development that's going on in the hinterlands. And so once he set out the concept of it, it really fruition. And now there was GPS Kevin, and there's controversy in this and that, but he was the one that put it on chips and kind of really modernized it, because Sam had the old, and I'm old enough to remember these too, is those old Enduro scrolls, man.
Yeah,
so this dude had like the Dead Sea Scrolls of like, then you go 3.2 miles and then turn left, and there's a little T-shaped drawing and all of those. So he put all the way across America on dirt roads on a big fucking, 75-mile long scroll that you could put up. And so GPS Kevin, I mean, he didn't do his homework. I mean, tell me that it exactly started where Sam's, it exactly ended with Sam's, like Minnesota doesn't have dirt roads that you couldn't cross, or, come on, Kevin. I mean, you suck, but at the end of the day, he did put it in more electronics and kind of more modernize it. And it was a couple of little routes that he found that within like, for example, I took Kevin's because I wanted specifically go to Lynchburg, Tennessee, because I had buddies of mine meet me there. And so Kevin's goes exactly through there, and Sam's is, 20 miles different, but stuff like that. It's all good. But then since then, and the whole dirt bike kind of renaissance, renewal and all of that is those back country discovery routes through, what's the map company?
Butler Maps.
Butler Maps. Also, when Butler Maps first kind of come out, I must say I gave it a shrug. It's like, oh, come on, man. Yeah, I can read a map and figure out it's squiggly as mine. But another friend of mine said, no, take a second look. And I'm not a hater and I love maps. But the Butler backcountry, and then those became individual NGOs, I think, by state. So it's kind of related to Butler, but at this point, many of the backcountry discovery routes have their own lives and their own.
So BDR is now its own nonprofit organization. Yeah, I mean, it was founded by the Butler Map guys, Justin Bradshaw and Court Butler, and then some of the guys from Touratech. But then they launched a nonprofit. So yeah, now that basically all the different states, and then there's the one in the Mid-Atlantic that crosses several states. But most of them are north to south routes. Mostly off-road routes in individual states, mostly out west, but there's some in the east.
Yeah. So similar to actually go back to Sam, is that so same thing, that was the other, like, oh, GPS Kevin put them up for free, and Sam's had a nominal, like $20 or $30 at the most for maps that he's Xerox, and he uses so my answer is, I didn't begrudge the man. It took him almost 20 years before the internet, and then when the internet came on, he had to kind of boot it. And he continuously, unlike Kevin, who was one and done, I think, but Sam actually goes back and he goes with friends. He discovers new routes. He's doing, but separately, kind of like we were talking about backcountry discovery routes, is yes, they're Sam's. Everyone should start there, buy a sticker, get a shirt, hook up the dude. He's a hero. But at the same time, there's to the tat belongs, and there's hundreds of versions. So there's and also too is separately individual states and the National Park Service and so on, is there's things that I'm interested in, which through the National Park, I'm kind of a history buff, is the Lewis and Clark, what do they call it? The Voyage of Discovery. And that's a part of the National Park. And if you're in St. Louis, you can get your little passport stamped, and throughout that route that ends up all the way to the Pacific, at the mouth of the Columbia. In fact, on the original version of the tent that I set out to do, that I wasn't going to end at Port Orford, I was going to end at, Cape Disappointment, or whatever they call that horrible place where they had to survive all the moss growing in their toes in the rainforest. And that's where the tat for me was going to end, like Lewis and Clark. Also along the way is of course, the Natchez Trace. There's the Trail of Tears, which I decided that's why I started on that. So in addition to the tats, I try to play Spock chess. I had a whole nother level where, as much as I could, I was trying to stick to the Trail of Tears route. And then when the Trail of Tears ends in Oklahoma, then once you get to GPS Kevin's route goes a little bit into Kansas. And so I did that part too, just because I wanted to throw another state. Whereas if you stay with Sam, there's no need to kind of go up and down. So I did that part. And then from there in Kansas, there's the Santa Fe Trail. And so I stayed on and that one, I left the tat and stayed on the Santa Fe because I had cousins and uncles there. So it's kind of not in the story, but I took a 3-day detour, and I just wanted to finish the Santa Fe Trail. Then I came back to the tat, and I, like I said, had cousins and my uncle lived over there. So I did it too. Then I got new tires in Trinidad. And then finally, and actually to me was one of the high points, and I'll try to put that in the story. The second part is the Mormon Trail. And Idaho, gosh, they did the coolest. The Mormon Trail in Idaho is totally off-road. It's just like the tat, or most of it is. And man, you can still see the ruts in the prairie. And God, there's something about tingling where you just crossed America, and I've had all my trials and tribulations and broke bones and all of that stuff. And I was driving in the footprints of the pioneers after that Three River crossing. And gosh, there's graffiti made with axle grease from the 1850s. Wow. And so, yes, the Mormon Trail that ends right there. And for me was at Farewell Bend. And there's a campground right there on the Snake River, on the westernmost little bulge of Idaho, right where it goes into Oregon, and a cool campground. And then that's kind of the end of and then it goes right. That's where Sam Carrero's trail starts. So I did in the West, I did a lot of that backcountry discovery route, but I kind of regretted it because backcountry discovery route in Utah is made for like Hurricane Bob Hanna. You know what I mean? And if you're just a turd like me with a fucking duffel bag on your back, there was a couple of times where I almost died. And if I never, ever, 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 ever ride a dirt bike in Utah again, ever, I'm kind of okay with that because it's just all rocks all the fucking time.
So, hey, let's back up a little bit because you stitched together your own sort of trail, like you had time.
Mostly with Sam, though.
Mostly with Sam, but
Sam.
you sort of, you added some variation. I know you went on some of the like bluegrass and music trails and
Yes.
the Appalachians and Ozarks. You sought out the best barbecue in some places. But let's go back to like, so when you were going to start the trip, you did this in 2020. So this was like right when COVID.
The year before that, right in COVID. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was right when they cracked it. First of all, there was a period of time where I thought, like, God just doesn't want me to do the tat. Like, originally I was planning this thing. And then I was going to do it actually the summer before COVID, but it took a lot longer to move and transition out of 30 years of government service, plus the Army before that. And, a totally new life. And I moved back home to Louisiana and get in the house. And then, that took life took a lot longer than I thought. Oh, meanwhile, I've been talking this up because I'm going to do this tent. And I bought that KTM brand new, 2020 500 EFXC, brand new for that year. And because originally I had the old KTM 640 Adventure, and it was a good bike. It still ran. I had run that thing from Colorado to my dad before he passed in Pahrump, all off road, and then rode it all the way back down in New Orleans, mostly off road, 2 up actually, with Sue's on the back, and etc. And I still had it, but A, it was kind of heavy for me, and B, it was getting a little long in the tooth. It had these niggling electrical things, and I'm a mechanic Neanderthal, man. So I'm like, no, I'm going to spend the money and buy that new bike. That wasn't cheap. It was as the most expensive. That dirt bike cost more than my street bike back in the day. And however, I thought it was the best tool for the job. It was like, basically I was looking for a 350. People say about the Tat, and it's true, is that no one ever wished they had a bigger bike. You know what I mean? You got to pick up that thing unassisted, probably nose face downhill on a scree slope, and by the way, take some piece of your limb and make it really hurt so you can't use it. And then, your ribs, hurt when you breathe, because when you fall down, that's what happens. And then pick that shit up. Like, forget it. Yeah. So I was looking for a 250, but then I thought, oh, my 200 plus pound ass. So then I was looking for a 350. But then when I went to the KTM place, it turns out from the 500 down to the 200, it's the same frame and the same transmission, same everything. It's just the piston size. Yeah. So with that KTM I found a 250 that has like 80 horsepower and they can haul my butt around. So I was like, perfect. That's why I bought that bike. So once I got the bike, then I had to do it because I bought this stupid bike and I'm never going to use it for anything else, right? So then when I talked, everyone's going to go. In the beginning, God, it was going to be like another affiliate of the Nomads or something, man. I mean, it was like everyone was going to go. But then it was like, okay, got the bike. I'm looking at this summer, we're going to do this. Then all kinds of life things started happening with other people. And then, of course, COVID happened. Oh, and then another thing, based on kind of inspired from some of the things that you've done, Greg, is that I was going to do one of those bring your own bike 3-day weekend, like live at an old campground and like some training guy and like how to do an adventure shit on your own bike. And I already had it, and then COVID happened. So in that April before Tat, when I was going to train for 3 days on my own bike and my own equipment, didn't happen. Then I had a buddy of mine that was living in Knoxville. And then the plan was they were going to come to New Orleans. They were going to trail my bike. We were going to go to Cape Hatteras together and then drop me off. And then life, COVID, and then his mom died. He had to go back to France and all this kind of stuff. So then here it is. I'm going to go. Everyone's dropping out. And finally, I'm like, if I got to wait for other people, it's never going to happen. I'm never going to have the time, the money, the inclination, and do this right now. So I'm going to do this now. Oh, and by the way, you can't leave too early on this thing because the mountain passes aren't clear until at least July. Yeah. Yeah. And so this is one that a little bit later is a little bit better because it is still hot as balls here in the South where air no longer is a gas. It's a fucking solid, man. Just lean into it, So you're, okay. So now how do I get the bike to Cape Hatteras, or at least to somewhere, out there in the Outer Banks or whatever? I thought Cape Hatteras because it's a park, a national park, and it's the furthest east of that part. Anyway, blah, blah. So, and there's a part you can ride along the beach also there. And so then I'm like, okay, in the back of every motorcycle magazine, probably yours as well. I know there is those ship your bike anywhere in the world for X amount of money. There's plenty of places that you can ship your bike. And so I thought, okay, everyone does it. It's not a thing. I'm going to do that. Turns out that we all know now about the infamous supply chain and all this trucking, but probably even in the day was, so I know it's not like FedEx where you can just call and, there it is, 48 hours, we'll get your bike there. I figured it was a couple of week lead time. So here it is, like the first or second week in June. And I'm like, okay, I might as well set this up. Meanwhile, I was still waiting for some gear to come, mail order. I had those Moscow sort of side bags that look like those old 30-30 slings, on the horses. It's kind of goes with your frame. And I thought, well, I got this, $15,000 dirt bike, I might as well use the travel. And so they made these like custom frames, but because of COVID and everything had closed, there was like a year waiting time. And so I didn't have all my gear that was on order even, but I thought, okay, I'll at least find out what it costs and I can start shopping around. So sort of like those Travelocity and Trulia, Expedia and all of those, it's kind of a scam. You notice when you first log on, the best price you get is like right then. And then if you go back to a couple other sites and you go back again, once they know you from the cookies, I guess it's like more. The same with those trucking things, man. When I first logged on, I figured, okay, it'll be like $3.99 one way. New Orleans, the big city, and I'll ship it to, I don't know, Roanoke or whatever, Wilmington or somewhere out there. It's a big city and something like that. Oh no. Every time I went back to the various things, it was more and more. It was $1,000-something already. And nothing was going. Oh, and you got to book that like months. It was almost too late. They were the only reasonable. Sorry, it's a helicopter going over everybody. We love the Coast Guard, and I'm glad they're out there looking for us. Anyway, Coast Guard is awesome. That's who that was. Check it up on us people out here by the water. Anyway, trucking, yes. So turns out that basically I got a guy on the phone instead of this internet stuff. And the 2 days I was going, and so it was like, okay, if you want it within this period and like the end of July, you got to book it within today or like by Friday. And that's it. I can't guarantee anything else. So I'm like, okay, yes. So, and then they can't guarantee delivery within like a week or 10 days. So, and then meanwhile, where am I going to send it? Originally, I just said I'd just send it to the parking lot of some motel or like to the campground. And I figured it'd be there. I'd be there like a weekend. I think they could tell you by the weekend, but I was pretty naive about it. I'm talking too long about something kind of boring at this point, but that was a huge, if I could do anything over again on the TAT was how the hell do you start at the TAT?
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to ride a 500cc totally knobby, dirt bike on a freeway from New Orleans to Cape Hatteras. I mean, that's a hell of a long trip. You'd be tired and your tires would be worn out, certainly on knobbies. And then the other thing is that right there in the Outer Banks, there's a paucity of motorcycle shops. And the only one there was like a couple of moped rental places, and they were like mom and pop, they weren't interested. No one wanted to take responsibility of having this bike delivered. Oh, and then when the truck guy came and I had all my luggage, they're like, oh, no. We're not going to, it was, the shipping the bike was almost harder than the TAT. And then finally, that's why I found that Harley. That's another one. Is that, I owned a Sportster before. Of course, I'm a Victory man now in terms of my street bike. But the Harley dealership here is a total dick, man. They won't touch anything. They won't, the tires on my Vic are the same size tires as their bike and the same kind of Dunlops I was buying. But, no, I got to drive over to the Indian thing. And so the same thing, I thought, no way is these Harley guys going to take a KTM. I mean, it's a totally different species, like they totally don't do that. But they were. I'll do all kinds of commercials and shout out to that Outer Banks Harley shop. Plus, it was right there, almost by the Outer Banks themselves, right there in Roanoke. So they're great guys. I don't want to mess them up. Maybe it was a one-off. The guy was just nice to me, and everyone's going to call them and they'll hate me again. But they were really, 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 really kind. And then, in fact, when my bike got there and I went to pick it up, took Uber there, from my little airport jaunt, and then the mirrors were off and this and that. And again, something else that no one ever does, especially not Harley dealerships, is the guy actually let me use his tools and let me, cinch up my stuff and put on all the things I needed to do on the handlebars and all that. And so, again, that one of the worst experiences was getting there in my first day. But one of the better hookups was those guys at that dealership. They really saved me. I couldn't have done the TED otherwise. I didn't know how I would have done it. How do you get a bike? Later on offline, we can talk about other strategies, but
yeah,
I don't know how you do it.
I mean, that's a reasonable thing. Like I said, if you got to start and, the coast of North Carolina and you don't live near there, then you got to figure out how to get your bike there, get your gear there. So you got the bike shipped, you were able to fly in, but then you had timing was such that you were like late July, early August, you had a hurricane headed your way.
Oh my God. That year, there were 5 named storms that crashed into southern Louisiana that year. That was 5 named storms. In fact, when I got back, it's not on the story, but Zeta hit me.
Hey, Dave. Hey, I know we had a little bit of a technical difficulty. Your phone overheated, but now we're back. You were talking about, we were there at the start of the TransAmerica Trail.
Sorry, Greg, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Hey, Dave, you there?
Yeah.
All right, good. We're back on. I know your phone overheated, so we had to sort of take a pause. So
yeah,
when things froze up, you were talking about basically being in North Carolina. You had gotten your bike from your KTM, had been delivered to the Outer Banks Harley Davidson dealership. You picked it up. You were going to, basically you wanted to start the TAT and you had a hurricane bearing down on you.
Yes, all of those things. And like I said, since I'd anticipated that I was going to have like 10 days, probably 7 to 10 days just there in the Outer Banks. The notion being was this big duffel bag with all of these sparkles on it that I had to put on the bike. And then I was going to test all the stuff and some of my new camping gear. Plus, I was supposed to meet friends at the campground. We had like a double place that you could reserve all that online. And then, so I had masks, snorkels. So I had a bunch of crap. And I think that's why the Harley Dave people helped me out, because they just want to get me the hell out of there because, I look like the Joad family, or the Grapes of Wrath or something. And then, so when I got there and they kicked me, when I got to did you hear the part about I just passed this, unending stream of Winnebagos and stuff?
Sure. So everybody's trying to outrun the hurricane.
Yeah, but I was oblivious to that because I was going south and everyone's going north, and I didn't realize there was a hurricane, because in the 48 hours it took me to travel was when this thing showed up and became a real hurricane, and they knew it was making landfall. And these things come very quickly. So you think I would have been smarter? It took me about an hour to notice that all the traffic was going the opposite way. And then I just was thinking, well, it must be really more popular up there and where the Wright brothers were, down here and I'm thinking, thank God I'm going south. And then when I got to the campground, it was like late in the day. It was like 4:00 in the afternoon. I was like ready to pitch camp. And the ranger's looking at me like, what the hell? What are you thinking? And I'm like, well, and he's like, it's going to make landfall right here, like right now, like in the next 12 hours. So I had to turn around and join this queue of all of these people. And I had a snorkel and a mask. Who starts the TAT with a fucking mask and snorkel? The idea was I was going to put it all in a box. My buddies were there in their car. I could leave that stuff. And anyway, blah, blah. So I tried to go to the post office and I couldn't because it was a Sunday or something already. I think it was the weekend when I got there. And then, of course, with the hurricane, everything was closed up. People are putting plywood on their windows. And so then I thought, well, in my version of the TAT, you can go all the way up the beach. And in fact, on some website, some gal did it on her bike and didn't know, and you're not supposed to, but you can, and all of this. So I didn't start off on the TAT. I started off on the Dave Scott TAT. And I thought I was so clever. And I went all the way up the beach to Virginia Beach. And that's like a 2-3 hour ride on sand. I mean, you're just spinning, and of course my unwieldy weight, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I got all the way up there, and it looked just like the end of The Great Escape. There was this like barbed wire and these like little beach obstacle things, and there was the state line right there. And I really thought, like, well, okay, if I was Steve McQueen, I could jump this fucking thing. But I didn't. I had to turn all the way around and drive another 3 hours back. God, and I was exhausted and hot. It was so hot. And so, yeah, the first day of the Tat was probably the worst day among the top 5 worst days of the Tat. Was the very first day.
Yeah, that's not how you want to start a trip. So you started out right on the beach. You got your tires wet in the Pacific,
Yes.
the Atlantic Ocean, and then so where did you officially pick up the start of the Tat? Is that in North Carolina inland?
Yeah, you cross there, that Kill Devil Hills, and then it's on pavement. The very other than that little dirt moment or whatever. Then and then you drive pretty much on pavement until the Great Dismal Swamp, because that's right there on the Virginia North Carolina border anyway. Okay. So you're probably 50, 60 miles in.
Okay.
Before, and even Kevin, because Sam, I took Sam's spur until about Appomattox Courthouse, and then I ended up joining the and then just around where the Appalachian Trail and all of that is towards West Virginia is the backcountry discovery route. Okay. And I took Sam's spur until the backcountry discovery route, and then I took the backcountry discovery route until Central Tennessee. And then I took part of GPS Kevin's and part of the shit that I made up just on the map, looking at dirt roads north of the Smoky Mountains. And then I joined. Yeah, that's kind of how I did. One caveat though is that those backcountry discovery routes are kind of made in these. They're kind of unidirectional. Even Sam's, you're supposed to start in the east and go to the west.
Right.
And so the backcountry discovery route goes through Virginia all the way up to New York. It's one of those multi-state ones.
Yeah.
It starts right there on the Tennessee. Yeah. Well, I did it backwards, like 2 or 3 day, 2.5 sections of it. I did north-south because a lot of it paralleled what Sam's route was. Plus, that's a country that's real pretty, and I wanted to be there. Well, I almost got killed on like my first or second full day, and I was coming up this kind of a steep forested trail, and 2 dipshits come from New York plates, come ripping around the corner. Big, when that 790, one of them had a 700cc. What bike is that? It's
790 Adventure Cake.
Yeah, the larger, and another guy had another one, in a Suzuki something, but bigger ones. Like there's a DR 750 or something. I think they're all like 750, 800, double, a little bit bigger than my bike, but one guy came right on the inside line where I was, where there's a cliff to your left and there's a big cliff straight up and you're on like a ledge, and I'm on a blind turn hugging the ledge.
Yeah. And
I almost was a head-on collision. And that guy did not change my line. And that was one of the first times I crashed on the Tat, other than the self-inflicted face plant at the gas station, which probably hurt worse than any other thing except for breaking my leg. But
which is interesting because the backcountry discovery route folks, they really advocate what they call ride right, and you even can buy a sticker pack from them with all their different stickers, and it says ride right, put a sticker where no matter what, you should always ride to the right on a trail, but especially around blind corners for exactly that reason. You never know if somebody's coming the other direction.
And the first guy was whoa, and then the second guy's like, almost like deer. You see one, you're gonna have to see another one, and the other guy was on the outside and came hauling down. He was driving way above his skill level, you could tell. And maybe he was out of control. I don't know. And then not 2 seconds later, it's like, wow. And then bam, this guy came forward. We actually hit handlebars, and I drove up onto the side of the embankment and then fell backwards over with all my gear. Ugh. And that dude knew I crashed. He knew he hit me. And to this day, that fucking pussy didn't even acknowledge. And then I could hear him further down, and I could hear them because we're the only ones in the woods. And I go, hey, I could yell, and my voice echoed, and then they kept going. So he knew that he knocked me down, and he knew. That's New York people, man.
That's not cool.
That was really, so that's the one thing I noticed, that the backcountry discovery, and in Southern Colorado as well, there was a little group of kids that I kept running into. And a couple of them were either aggressive or just shitty riders that make them seem aggressive because they're riding at the ledge of their limits and they can't control kind of things. And so that's the one thing about that backcountry routes is they seem to be more well-traveled than the Tat, actually. Because the Tat's a lot of just farm roads, and, you're just seeing old pickups with no license plates and stuff on them. Whereas the BCDR, Weekend Warrior, that's the other thing, is I learned even though I'm a retired guy and it took me a couple months to do the tat and there's no schedule and you do what you do and it takes the time it takes, etc., is I in certain places like Ozarks, Arkansas, Eastern Tennessee, and all of Utah and all of Colorado, is you were definitely aware of when Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was.
Oh yeah.
Man, it was palpable. And that's when, because of that first weekend experience, because it turns out that was actually the first weekend. It's a bunch of dipshits on that Saturday. And so that's when it changed also. I had to be very aware of when the weekend was and ride a lot more defensively.
Sure.
But then there's other times you wish you would have seen another vehicle. Because you're really, when you were talking about that Canada TAT guy, or Trans TCT, I guess it is, man, there is some lonely country up there.
Yeah. Yeah, they were up in Northern Ontario where they were, like said, there was just nobody up there. So, well, that actually brings me to a question, because, so, you know, you basically brought the gear to where you could camp the entire time. I know you didn't, but so how did you sort of split up your time with, you know, I know some of it would probably be weather dependent, but camping versus coming off the trail to see some other sites, to, you know, take a rest day. So how did you kind of do that?
Yes. Yeah, actually, I'll go back a little bit too. There were some aspects of it that were very specific to that time. 5 named storms, and of course, the second iteration was Ida. That was the largest hurricane since Katrina. That's so every summer there's that for me. But separately was the COVID thing.
Sure. Yeah.
This was the very first beginning of COVID when they opened the doors for all of us to go out. And so weirdly, in fact, unique in my entire life before and since then, almost all of the campgrounds were totally full and at capacity. Even the weirdest little dumb state campgrounds had people, and then almost all the motels were all really cheap. It was like, if I paid $50 as the most expensive motel the whole way, they were all half price, all like, and so in the beginning, by default, like, around I was kind of naive because I thought, oh, there's on a motorcycle and a tent camp, there's always the extra spots, hike-in spots. Or I was pretty sure, like, I didn't need to make reservations other than Cape Hatteras because I was going to be there for a week and there's going to be guys with cars and all the team. But other than that, I didn't think I needed reservations, because then you find yourself chasing them or getting there and it's 2:00 and you have more riding time, and it's kind of a double-edged sword of how you organize yourself. Sam did a great job in laying out, possibilities and so on. But, sometimes you're right. Like before I left, I did the top 10 barbecue, top 10 best roadside eats, Weird America. I did, I want to see the Corn Palace, all those things, the two-headed alligator museum and all of those things I kind of put along the TAT as well. So on those things, like, I'm going to have a nice lunch, I'm going to sit there. And so that'll be a lower TAT day because the priority was a nice meal day, and so and then a lot of them I kind of blew off because I'm not that doctrinaire. If I'm making good time and it's really nice or it's pissing rain, and I'm not going to go see that. I don't want to see the two-headed alligator that bad. I wasn't going to. So it's kind of whimsical. So I had a really great system that I have to this day that's just badass. Is that I've got one of those tent hammock things that has mosquito deal. It's the one by that British guy that went through the Amazon with it for 2 weeks or whatever. I've been in crazy pissing rain in Eastern Tennessee. I mean, I spent all day in that little tent almost. It was raining so hard. And I've been in bug entrenched places, and that whole thing wads up to be about the size of 2 butt cheeks, you know what I mean? That's with the tarp and all of the mosquito, and you can make it modular, like if it's a really warm day. And so that thing was awesome because that allowed me to camp anywhere.
Right.
And I mean, even in the Oklahoma Panhandle, where there's these sand dune things that I went into just for fun, and there's no foliage, but the picnic tables themselves have this little shelter around them, and you can put it diagonally just all the way across. And that's, in fact, I love those things. And then you can put all your gear below you on the picnic table and just camp on and so that little thing allowed me to camp anywhere I needed to. And it really freed me up from like terrestrial concerns although I ended up taking a lot more motels, mostly is because and then later on in the TAT, is just something you well know, but I was also a bit naive, is any time of year, no matter what, within 100-mile radius of Moab you have to have reservations. I don't give a shit for camping, for motels, for everything. And there's a lot of you can't camp here places to do your little guerrilla style. And similarly is in the Lake Peak District between Telluride, Waray, and all of those. Those are two little hot centers that year round, you got to have some kind of reservation.
Yeah.
You just got to.
Yeah, they get a lot of pressure. So, hey, I have a question. So I know that you've had some challenges, and I'm pretty sure we're going to do this podcast interview in two parts, kind of like your story in the magazine. So what I recall from reading your story and talking to you is that, and this is something that since I live out west and we're always desperate for rain, the part about the TAT that is most challenging for a lot of people is in the eastern states, particularly Tennessee, Mississippi, and so forth, is the mud.
Oh, yeah. Here's one where, so because this bike was brand new, it was a 2020 500 EXC-F.
Yeah.
And it was new for even the KTM lineup. I mean, that whole family of bikes is new, and it's a magnificent machine. However, they had a very conservative oil change thing on it. It was something like, 1,500 miles or something. It's mostly set up for racing and all this, but there was so little information on it because this is one of these, you got to order the bike. I mean, I just got this bike, and even the place itself that sponsored some, anyway, blah, blah. So I was, and also I'm starting the TAT. So I was real conservative on the oil changes. Some guys do the oil change once or even can go all the way across. But in my case, and so I printed out a list of all the KTM dealerships anyway, and I marked them and all the TAT maps, and on my Garmin, I dropped little needles in. Yeah. So because in some places like Colorado, there's all KTMs all the time. Yeah. But in other places like the east of the Mississippi, there are very few and far between. You got to really look for these KTM. And again, some of these dipshit dealerships are just scum. That's why I support these lawsuits that are out there now, about like that. I guess Tesla's trying to force these states to lift up and allow people to wrench on other things, to do other services. And anyway, blah, blah. So the rain is, so the first place I went to is in a place called, it's like Friendly, Tennessee or something. It's just into Tennessee. I kind of left and then went back to the TAT to get it. And these guys, they don't work on the adventure KTMs. Yeah. They only do all dirt bikes all the time. And in fact, hardcore racers. It was actually one of the better, just a guy and his daughter, and that run this place, and they're very cool. And there was a bunch of young kids, like early 20s, all racing people with big, deep scars on their legs like mine, and pieces of metal and stuff. And there's a group of these insane Eastern Tennessee Tellico Plains guys that every year is training. They do the TAT as a loop, and they do it, the whole thing, in like a month to 6 weeks. Jeez. It's like 2.5 weeks out, 2.5 weeks in. They average like 40, 50 miles an hour. They have it dialed into all their gas stops where they stay and stop. To me, that sounds awful. That sounds like the Army. It's like get up at 4 a.m., ride until you puke. And then get up at 4 a.m. and there's no stops at the bikes break. They just leave them. Yeah. And they have like a chase vehicle that's 2 or 3 days behind them. Yeah. They're just scooping up the body parts and the pieces of motorcycle. They don't do any camping. They just already have a guy at the motel that sets them up their food, and it's like a pros. And they literally do it every year, and they have like among themselves. So that's a separate TAT thing. That's not even the TAT for me. That's like crazy shit. Yeah. But so I was talking, at first I thought they were full of crap. But after a while, it was like, no, that's what they do. And so those guys, because I was like, okay, I'm trying to get intel from them. This is the very beginning. This is right when I'm kind of getting into the TAT. I got rid of all my gear. The bike was dialed in. The big famous water crossings that you see in all those Faces of Death Part 3, TAT version. It was like these horrible water crossings in Tennessee. That was all in front of me, and it was hanging on me because I was scared. And then I didn't know what I was doing. And so these guys were like, I said, well, what's the gnarliest? Some people say that War Loop Road in Arkansas. No, they were like, dude, Mississippi. And they're like, yeah. And they point this other dude was like kind of like Quasimodo, or what's the guy from Young Frankenstein, with Igor with the hump that kept changing. He had like this, and he was like, yeah, Skinny over there totally like did a complex fracture with his collarbone in Yazoo City, Mississippi. And I'm like, what? And they're like, oh yeah. They're like, that Mississippi, if it's dry most of the time, there's these insane deep ruts. that used to be tire tracks. And of course, these guys are literally 60, 70 miles an hour. Because that's what one of them said. He says, yeah, you hit one of those at 70 miles an hour. And I think, who the fuck goes 70 miles an hour on the tap? But these guys do. Because they have like, not even KTMs. These guys have like Husqvarnas and stuff, like they're crazy guys. But so they were all like, oh yes, treat Mississippi with the deepest respect. Okay. They were like, respect fucking Mississippi. In fact, a lot of people blow off Mississippi the way the Tennessee's got such good roads and interesting trails all the way, and there's separate ways. But here's another thing, is that Sam Carrero, as we talked about, I don't know when this conversation began, is born and raised in Mississippi. In fact, he lives in Counce, which is right where Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee kind of come together right there. Okay. Buford Pusser country, man, walking tall. Yeah. And so, oh my God, that's one where I cheated on Sam, and I felt so bad because over breakfast he was asking me stuff, and I kind of is that the Tat is overstacked right there. If you go from Davy Crockett State Park, it's like a day to count, long day. But if you do Sam's way, it's like another 2 or 3 days. And you're like, are you crazy? Because that's Sam's backyard. And so those trails are so dialed in, and he does lots and lots of challenging shit, because I think that's actually the more challenging part of Sam. So that's another thing y'all should kind of know, is that, don't blow off Mississippi. And although weirdly, probably a third of these listeners that do the Tat or whatever are going to go, I did Mississippi. I don't even remember it. That wasn't a thing. Because if you catch it just right, and there's no crazy ruts, and there's no other thing. But of course, we talked about earlier is, so right when I left Sam's place, also one of the top 3 food destinations on the entire Tat from coast to coast is a place that's just on the Tennessee border between Shiloh National Battlefield and Counce, is a place that does hickory smoked catfish. Now, I'm a catfish guy. I'm from Louisiana, and catfish, the capital of the world is Mississippi. But this hickory smoked, and it's not jerky. It's like the way they steam it in the smoke. Oh my God, that's worth just a trip there, and it's unique. I've never had that before anywhere. But that little brain cell. But no to everybody, you got to get the. Okay. And Sam was one that told me about that place, and again, thank you, Sam. So Mississippi, it's either dry with weird ruts that you don't expect, that are diagonally and perpendicular to whatever line you want to be in, and dozens of them, or in my case, where one hurricane blew over, I parked longer than I needed to in Oxford, trying to wait till the trails to dry out and everything, got back on the Tat. Turns out another the one that wiped out Lake Charles. Yeah. What one was that? And that thing was so strong that it hit Lake Charles as a strong 2, almost a 3, and it went all the way into Arkansas, stayed as a 1, crossed over to northern Mississippi and Tennessee, and stayed as a 1, and punched all the way through, and ended up flooding the backside of Philadelphia. Yeah. That was a strong, sustained storm. It wasn't high in number. So that was coming. But I thought, okay, it was coming somewhere to Texas, when this other one blew over. And it turns out, again, I had like an 18-hour window between and I thought, I'm going to be living in. And oh, by the way, as I'd mentioned, I had almost not did the Tat when it started off so bad. I was just on my way home. And so ironically, at the lowest southernmost part of the entire Tat in central South Mississippi, where it slowly arcs up and goes due northeast all the way to Port Orford, at that moment where I would have turned off and gone home in about 3.5-hour drive on pavement, when I decided, no, I'm doing it no matter what. And I felt really good about myself. I was like, wow, I had a good start. It was like 10:30. Things were kind of wet and a little bit soupy sometimes, but I was good. Bike was good. I'm really, 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 that to me was like the first real day of the Tat. By that afternoon is when I got into the soup. I just thought, oh God.
I mean, because I felt for you, because when I was a kid, I used to live in Georgia. I used to do mountain biking in the red clay, and when it was wet, that stuff would stick to everything and glom up onto everything. And so if you're stuck in that kind of red clay mud, it is an absolute quagmire.
You can't. There's no. It's not even a question of I'm slipping and I'll just somehow jelly my way through it. No, the bike physically can't move. Like you said, is that you can't even see what looks like a tire. All of the knobbies are completely such that it can't roll through the swing arm because it's just thick, and you can't even scoop it off. I can't tell you how many pine branches I snapped down to my bleeding knuckles of just trying to scrape and chisel that shit.
Yeah. So you like I said, I know you had recommitted to staying on the TAT again. The story that has some details that aren't in this podcast will be in the November issue of Rider, but you had recommitted and you somehow made it out of the mud in Mississippi back onto some tarmac. And then what? So from Mississippi, I know you had a chance to meet Sam Carrero himself. You had breakfast at his house. He lives right off the TAT. And then after you met with Sam, do you cross the Mississippi and then enter into Arkansas?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then our mutual friend, guy I went to college with that lives in St. Louis, Rick Koch, he had time off. And so we met in a random motel just on the edge of the Ozarks. And so he drove down from southern South County, St. Louis.
He's got your old KTM 640 Adventure, right?
Yeah, he had my old one, the one that I was originally going to do. So it was kind of set up for the TAT. And so it was a good bike. And so we did that. And that was also interesting because, I was my solo vagant, doing it on my own, but then riding with another person makes it another thing and a separate conversation. But, there's pluses and minuses with doing the TAT with other guys that made it so awesome. But then there were other parts that was a little bit frustrating, but the Arkansas was different totally because it was I did it with another person.
Well, hey, listen, because we've run a bit long on time, is what I want to do is I want to have a second conversation with you, because you said that the Arkansas was one of your favorite parts of the TAT because like anybody who's ever ridden in the Ozarks know whether you're on road or off road, it's really good riding. So I'd love to pick up this conversation, talk about Arkansas. I know we've definitely got to talk about Colorado because you got to get out there, but then you had some pretty hair-raising parts of your ride and stuff like that. So let's put a pin in the conversation for now. Let's sort of wrap up this one episode, and then let's have another conversation about Arkansas and beyond, because I want to keep it. It's been too long since we've talked. I'm glad to hear your oral telling of the story as well as reading about it. So I want to pick up the conversation again. So does that sound good?
Yeah, it's always great to talk to you, Greg. It's good to see you, man. Although I barely recognize you.
I know, yeah, I know. My long beard and your long hair, it's like we make quite a pair. So, hey, Dave, again, I will pick up a conversation with you soon. I appreciate it. We'll do another episode. We'll continue the story going. Thanks for writing a story for the November issue of Rider. I know there's a part 2 that's coming. So definitely when we get off this episode of this interview, get to work with the writing on that, and we'll get part 2 of it. So. Okay. All right. Hey, thanks everybody for listening for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.